Chapter 1. Calder Martin stood on the deck of his ship, sailing into the wall of black clouds and rain. He clamped his hat down, holding it tight against the slashing grip of the storm. "No more need for sails, Andal," Calder shouted. "We go against the wind." Quartermaster Andal Patronus stood next to him, clutching his own hat.
"What do you expect me to do about that, sir?"
"Nothing. I simply enjoy shouting." Calder gripped the wheel, reading the intent bound into the wood. His mind flowed through the bones of the ship, sensing every inch of the testament as though it were his own body. He sent a simple, silent order to his vessel. Behind him, the sails furled. They looked more like a bat's wings than ordinary canvas sheets. The testament's sails were nothing more than stretches of membranous green skin that seemed to grow from the mast and yard. When they folded, the ship resembled a nightworm bunching its wings to dive. As the ship began to slow, Calder sent another mental command. After a moment, they continued moving, jerking forward a few dozen yards at a stretch, as though an invisible giant tugged them along behind.
"Is my wife secure?"
The quartermaster shook his head.
"I'm afraid she's dead, sir. A fever took her in the night."
Calder spared a glance from the upcoming storm wall to catch a look at Andal's face. Andal Patronus was a Heartlander, dark-skinned, and his white suit and hat stood out against the black wood of the deck. The man, as usual, wore no expression. He pressed his hat down with one hand and clung to the railing with the other. "One day you're actually going to have bad news for me, Andal."
"Then I'll try to smile, so you know something's wrong."
The man in white strode off across the deck, shouting orders. "Raise the thunder lights! Ready the cannons!" Calder silently persuaded the ship to release its 4 captives. Thunder lights, huge alchemical lanterns with copper spikes that unfolded almost as high as the mast. Thick ropes hauled the devices out of the hold through a hatch on deck, until a glass lantern big enough to hold a man rested on each of the 4 corners of the ship. The lines tightened themselves, tying each thunderlight to the deck, but Andal had to release the copper spike by hand. As the first drops of rain began to slap the ship, Andal turned a crank on the lantern, slowly raising a copper limb into the sky. An Imperial navigator could sail the Aeon Sea with a light crew thanks to the captain's control over the ship, but even Calder couldn't handle everything. The storm was a dark slice of night in front of them now, flashing with lightning and rolling with wind-tossed waves. As the ship slammed down into a valley between 2 waves, sending spray rolling over the deck, Calder looked to his gunner. Dalton Foster straddled one of the cannons, a hammer in one hand and an alchemist's spray bottle in the other. He was leaning out over the railing, his head practically stuck inside the cannon's mouth. "How's it coming with those cannons, Foster?" Calder shouted. Foster pulled his head out and turned. His wild hair and beard were soaked through until he looked like a cat that had escaped the bath. He tore one pair of spectacles off, letting them dangle from a cord around his neck, and lifted a second pair to his eyes. "That depends, Captain. Do you want to hit our quarry, or do you want a face full of shrapnel when the cannon explodes?" "Must I choose, or can I have it all?" Calder squinted up through the rain, scanning the ceiling of dark clouds and jagged light. The chimera they hunted wasn't particularly dangerous on its own, but it only flew during lightning storms. They'd been tracking this one for weeks, and if it got away this time, he might decide to mutiny against himself. Those thunderlights had cost him 100 gold marks apiece. Andal finally finished setting the lights, their copper poles stabbing into the storm. Normally, they would be risking their mast in the storm like this, but those copper poles were invested to attract lightning. Calder had read them himself, checking and strengthening their intent. He only hoped they would work soon, so they didn't spend any more time in this weather than necessary. Even as the thought occurred to him, a spear of lightning stabbed one of the copper spikes. There came a blinding flash from the starboard thunderlight, and then the liquid in the glass container ignited, glowing with the bright yellow of a cheery summer noon. In essence, thunderlights worked the same as quick lamps. They were glass containers of alchemical formula that produced bright, steady light. But unlike quick lamps, which glowed for a few years and had to be replaced, these thunderlights would work as long as they had lightning to recharge them. They were essential equipment for any navigator that meant to hunt stormwings. But Calder was missing something even more critical, namely, his prey. Normally, a stormwing would show itself on the storm wall, drifting over the tops of the choppy waves. But the Testament was still charging through air thick with slashing rain, all with no sight of the Chimera. Calder was about to call for more drastic measures, but then a song drifted over the detonations of thunder and the crash of waves against the hull. It sounded something like a pod of whales singing in chorus, somehow keeping harmony with the percussion of the storm. "Port side, Andal!" Calder shouted as the stormwing blasted through a wave. He caught sight of it in flight. The Chimera soared over their ship, a line of pure white lightning with wings of shadow stretching off to the sides. It sang in triumph and exultation as it passed over, its volume piercing even through the storm. The wheel fought him as he forced the ship to starboard, lining up with the stormwing as it vanished behind a wave. A bright detonation marked the creature's passage, sending up a towering spray. Andal's white suit was already soaked through, but he didn't let that affect his dignity as he marched across the deck. "We have a shot, Mr. Foster. Load the red shot." Foster clung to the cannon like a monkey to a tree branch, furiously working on something that Calder couldn't make